catacomb dweller. Maybe there is a little mystical in the story in my opinion, but it still creeps me out, even after so many years. As a teenager, I often went on vacation to summer camp. The first year, I was just on vacation, but even then, I heard stories from other children about the catacombs located on the territory of our camp. Somehow, I decided to go along with the group, but the counselors caught us on the way. For some reason, attempting to climb into the catacombs was considered a major offense by the camp administration. The following summer, I was already practicing at the camp and preparing to become a junior counselor. Almost all of the current counselors have been simple vacationers for a year or two, and many of them still managed to visit the catacombs. It turned out that the underground tunnels were just a bomb shelter built back in Soviet times, and on the site of our camp, like on the site of most other modern camps, there was a pioneer recreation center, or also a camp. The children dubbed these tunnels catacombs, most likely because they sounded cool. Many who visited the catacombs brought various kinds of trophies back, such as broken parts of gas masks and old books, and one even found a whole flask with USSR symbols. The tunnels themselves go many meters underground. It is known that these catacombs are divided into several levels in depth, but usually, no one ever dared to descend from the already well-explored first level to the second. The tunnels are confusing, and it is quite possible to get lost in them. Of course, there were brave souls, but they did not wander far. If the scares about the first level could only impress the younger group, even the elders spoke seriously about the strange sounds that was sometimes heard from the second level and the shadows on the walls. Being there, according to those who descended, was simply physically unpleasant. Fear rolled in, and all sorts of things were being imagined by the people there. The darkness there was impenetrable. Even good flashlights could barely dispel it, and the corridors were confusing, with a bunch of branches, many of which extended throughout the entire camp. Also, during all this time, no one was ever able to find the way to the third level, although it definitely should have been there. But for the most part, the catacombs were simply an adventure for vacationers and an opportunity to scare the girls by organizing mass hikes. In the camp, during almost every shift, there were knowledgeable guys who had been there many times and led such trips. Such people usually risked going down to the second level. One day, at the fire behind our building, the cannon, one of these travelers told me how he and a friend of his once descended below the first level in search of the entrance to the third. Here is the story in his own words. In the evening, we brought the girls to scare them in the catacombs. My neighbors in the building were already waiting for us below in order to ambush the girls we were leading. Everything went as usual, screams, squeals, and laughter. At the end, getting ready to leave, Andre, also one of the experienced guides, suggested we go down and look for something interesting. We were just standing at the stairs leading to the second level, and without hesitation, Baka, the third participant in the hike, remained waiting for us on the first. In general, we went downstairs, lighting the way with our mobile phones, and walked around the rooms and corridors. We found a couple of elephants, as he called gas masks, broken as usual. When we looked around the room with a large table in the middle, it seemed to me that there was a passage. The light in the adjacent corridor flashed for a moment and went out. Andriuka and I thought that it was Baka who had come down and called him, but he answered us from above. After quickly talking to him at the stairs, I realized that he did not come down, and indeed to him. At first it was already creepy. He said that he heard some rustling in the corridors, and it was already evening. It was time to go to the camp for dinner, and then to the disco. The counselors are about to start looking for us probably. It was strange to hear such a thing from him, considering that he had climbed down here more than us. So we just teased him about his girl from a parallel squad, with whom he probably wants to meet at a disco, and return to the search. Andre and I decided that until we found the way to the 3rd level, we would not return, and began to rummage around the rooms. Several times, I myself heard rustling noises in the corners, and once even music. I thought it was my partner who turned it on his phone, but he said he did not do anything. Finally, we found the treasured hatch under that very table. We had to move a 100-year-old, rotten wooden bandura to get to it. It gave in easily and moved, and below there is darkness with an iron staircase going into it. Even then it seemed strange to me that in a typical bomb shelter, the downward passage was made strictly vertical. We expected to see an ordinary staircase, albeit steep, from the 1st to the 2nd. Andre was full of desire to go down, since he had long dreamed of his flask from the depths of the catacombs, or something cooler. Maybe he would even find a weapon. Then I heard music again, and it was coming from the same hatch. At first it seemed to me it was some kind of pop music, but then I discerned something classical, and the sound itself had some kind of crackle, like on a vinyl record. There was definitely an old record player playing downstairs, and from the very passage there was clearly a smell of dampness. I immediately did not want to go down there. I pushed my friend on the shoulder to wordlessly tell him to leave. Out of surprise, he dropped the phone from his hands, straight into the unfortunate hole. The roar below was most likely even heard by Bach at the first. The music immediately stopped. The roar below was most likely heard even by Baka at the 1st level. The music immediately stopped, and with such a sharp sound that happens when you remove the needle from a record. Footsteps were heard below, but there was no light, and whoever was there was walking in absolute darkness. The hatch ladder trembled, signaling that something was already climbing up. Without remembering ourselves, Andre and I rushed away to the surface. We literally grabbed Baka by the collar on the stairs and dragged him along with us to the exit. We ran for a long time, all the way to the buildings, where our counselor was already waiting for us. Of course, we were deprived of discos as a punishment, but we didn't care much about that then. I literally did not sleep for several nights, waiting for them to come for me. I have never experienced such fear in my life. I drank the entire supply of Camp Valerian tinctures. A week later, Andre and I decided to quietly look there again. In a hurry, we left all the gas masks obtained on the 2nd floor at that hatch and wanted to return to them, and Andre's expensive phone was still there. We thought for a long time about what happened there and decided that we were most likely imagining it because of fatigue. This took away the fears of that evening, but apparently not completely. Having reached the passage to the 2nd level, we found fragments of gas masks and Andriuka's phone on top, lying right on the stairs down. As if someone had brought them here from the 2nd level and left them lying there, as if especially just for us. Such fear gripped us that we, without touching anything except for our mobile phone, ran back to the camp. We thought about all this for a long time. It became clear that it was not our imagination that created all this horror. On the day we visited the 2nd level, no one could enter the catacombs before us. In the morning, we were all there and preparing an excursion for the girls. It seems that the one who listened to the music on the 3rd level and brought our trophies to the 1st was there long before us, almost the whole day. It is possible that he actually lives there, and, of course, is accustomed to the complete absence of lighting in the tunnels. At first, we thought about the homeless. Although these catacombs are located on the territory of the camp, and you can only get to them by going through the main gate, which is guarded unconscientiously, maybe someone settled there during the period when the camp was abandoned. But then it turned out that he would have to have been living there continuously for more than 15 years. Andre's phone was in good and working order. Only the screen was slightly cracked. His mother called him several times during his week of lying in the tunnels. Having received no answer, she called Baka and spoke to her son for his phone. Someone dropped all the calls from his mobile phone, or accepted them but remained silent. There were a couple of new pictures in the gallery, all very darkened. Andre preferred to think that they were made by one of the jokers who went down there before him and found the folded trophies by the stairs. His friend did not try to convince him otherwise, even though he offered to cover them on the program, but the fear of what he would see there forced the owner of the phone to simply delete the ominous photos. The guy who told me the story continued to lead the groups into the catacombs, but he did not even come close to the stairs to the second level. Sometimes he imagined this music from the record, even in the distant corridors at the other end of the first level. Those to whom he told about this mainly referred to imagination or jokes on the part of friends. The last straw was the information he obtained from the camp caretaker. According to him, the third level of the bomb shelter is not the last. There is a fourth and a fifth, but they seem to be flooded with groundwater. As for the third, it was not completed to the end. There is absolutely no ventilation, and there is almost no air circulation. The air circulation is already lousy on the second one. Most likely, all of his ailments were due to the lack of air. The third one, according to the caretaker, was also flooded and was not going to be used and was closed 20 years ago. Then the entire bomb shelter was no longer needed. That hatch should have been welded tightly. The caretaker himself personally checked it when the camp was opened, but someone still opened it and went downstairs. And now he lives there, hiding from daylight. Apparently, not particularly experiencing discomfort from the lack of clean air. This story really impressed me at the time, so much so that I forgot to even think about the idea of going down into these tunnels. And besides, after another excursion for the girls, which ended up with someone having a nervous breakdown, they were locked up. There were rumors that this excursion was also aimed at finding that hatch, but I do not know the details. Of course, it was possible next year, when I became a counselor, to take the keys from the administration, but I did not do this. Sometimes it's better, like Andre, not to know what you're not supposed to know, and find a simple explanation. Gentlemen, you don't have to go to Africa for giant spiders. There are plenty right here in the US. Think huntsman type, but much, much, much bigger. OMG this. I told a story a while back. Shit, I don't remember, but I will tell again. In AZ, visiting old work buddy. Buddy is former army, combat tour in Afghanistan, drinking heavily, watching backyard fire, asking questions, somehow get on the subject of shit we don't talk about, launches into story, gets all excited and slurs out this. Army bro got back from the sandbox. His infantry unit gets reassigned to work in AZ, someplace on the northern part of the Grand Canyon. Army is supposedly doing excavations in tunnels at the bottom of the canyon, bringing artifacts up. Tunnels, however, are heavily inhabited and infested by spiders of various sizes, ranging from regular spiders to spiders the size of cars. Spiders are territorial and aggressive. Army bro said he spent most of his time pulling topside guard duty. Best story he had. Gets on guard duty, settles in, watching birds and shit. Suddenly, campsite goes on alert, and QRF dives into tunnels. After a while they start coming back, acting pleased with themselves. Said he saw one dude brought up on a stretcher with his leg all fucked up. Described it as basically melting from a single bite point. Another guy comes up behind the bit soldier and is getting hugs in celebration. Scuttlebutt was that the search squad, along with the people looking for stuff down there, were ambushed by a bunch of spiders, usually easily shot down or scared off by flares and fire. Kid got bitten on his upper thigh and injected with venom, which started to turn his leg into jelly. Big dick energy dude jumped in to save his friend, dropped rifle trying to drag him back, finally engaged using pistol and knife. Saved his buddy by ripping off Spider's foreleg and using it to stab the fucker's eye out. According to Army Bro, the spiders would die if they got a few limbs shut off, cause their bodies needed constant hydraulic pressure. Holy shit, Anon. So not only is the army dealing with giant spiders during training exercises, but they're fighting them for real, while pulling some Indiana Jones type missions. Glad someone paid attention to the article I posted. So did your army bro tell you anything about the artifacts they're finding? Is it Egyptian stuff? Glad I came back. Army bro said that there were things loaded into plastic storage boxes, and said a couple of spiders got loaded up as well, dead and alive. Said he heard that the army had moved other stuff out of the site, and it was still ongoing when his platoon rotated out. There was a claim made by a guest on C2 Cam years ago that the army supposedly airlifted 2 obsidian crypts/coffins out of the canyon that was so large they had to be tether lifted by Chinook helicopter. The boxes were covered in symbols or writing. Don't remember who made the claim, but the episode was on giants. Of related topic, there is the Giants of Kandahar story, which Army Bro said he believed was gospel. For those not in the know, Ranger Element goes on search and destroy mission in Hillside in Kandahar. Supposed to find Al-Qaeda in caves and mountains, get attacked by an enormous humanoid, wielding a spear or bow or something. Small arms, ineffective. Finally drop the creature with heavy weapons. Intelligence, alphabet boys, whoever, shows up and takes the body. Scrubs everything. Swears everyone to silence. Didn't realize how quick word travels in the military, but officially denied all stories as rumor, hearsay, and lies. Giant people. Giant spiders. I don't know if there's a link, but as for AZ, look, we tested the A-bomb in White Sands. There has to be some kind of correlation between that much radiation and the fact that the southwest United States is full of bumps in the night. It is not a Greentext, but it feels like it was inspired by a Greentext, despite it allegedly being real and then just disappearing. I'm wondering if anyone knows or can link to it. It is a video. Soldiers in Afghanistan or Iraq or one of those sand countries. There's a lot of them, like 24 or more. Discover a village. Not a single person anywhere to be found. But there's indications people were just there. Food still cooking and that kind of stuff. Split up into groups and start searching the village looking for people. Gradually, less and less start responding to radio calls. Eventually, the one whose body cam the whole thing is filmed through walked into a house or some kind of building. Several soldiers there, staring at the wall or some shit. Some kind of X markings hanging from the ceiling and stuff. Soldier ask soldiers what the heck they are doing. Turn around and have that 1,000-yard stare. Then something happens I can't recall. Camera cuts off. The production value was way too high for it to be some neats. At the same time, I never heard anyone say it was from a legit movie, not even a low-budget one. It was a spooky video. I only saw it once, so 30 to 90% of my description could be headcanon. Basic gist is right though. I would like to see it again. Alright, so forgive my formatting. I don't really post to 4chan a whole lot. I usually just look X. But since the holidays, I've been able to hear more stories from my dad, so I think y'all might enjoy. The first couple are from my grandpa. I had heard stories about my grandpa ever since I was a kid. He was my dad's dad and experienced a lot in life, and this in turn generated some of the most amazing stories I had heard in my childhood. After the Korean War, he became a law enforcement officer in Lubbock, Texas in the late 50s, being the first Hispanic to be employed in the Texas civil service system there. And then from 1960 to 67, he served as a Texas Border Patrol agent, becoming one of the first 5 Hispanics to be employed by the agency up to that time. He later worked for the U.S. Customs Agency Service and the DEA in the 70s. My dad always told me some amazing stories, and not all of them fit here, and some are not for me to share. But he has too, that although they did not happen to him, have been told to my dad, who later told them to me, in pretty good detail. So the next 2 stories take place between 1960 and 1967. My dad's family was living in the southwest Texas town of Eagle Pass, which is a border town that borders the Mexican city of Piedras Negras. My grandpa was doing border patrol work there, and in the nearby border towns that are scattered along the Rio Grande River. The sand trap. Now before I get into the story, I have to explain what a sand trap is. It's not necessarily a trap exactly. There are some spots along the Rio Grande that are low enough to cross over without much effort. These areas are patrolled, but can't be monitored 24/7, especially back then. So sometimes the immigrants pass through without detection. In places where the brush was not too thick, they would throw down layers of sand and smooth it out. This allowed them to monitor and count footprints and track who or how many people were crossing the river and into the US. My grandpa worked the morning shift and arrived at the station to supposedly catch up on paperwork and get some coffee. That's where he found the late night officer, who I'll refer to as Mr. L. At the station, back from his post earlier than he should have. He was pale and looking very distraught. Grandpa asked Mr. L what his deal was and was told the following story. Mr. L had been hearing rumors of some creepy post out in Del Rio, a town about an hour north of Eagle Pass. Essentially, there was a low point in the river where immigrants would cross and enter private ranch land. Multiple BP agents would be sent to check the sand trap to see if anything was turning up, but they never got any footprints. They needed someone out there to monitor it more closely. However, nobody wanted to stay after dusk. The area was rumored to be unsettling and quite possibly haunted. Mr. L thought that was a crock of shit. My dad describes Mr. L as a very tall man, shaved head, and very tough. The kind of person who does not take any bullshit. He decided that he would go out there himself at night and show these other guys that they're just being a bunch of sissies. He drives to the Del Rio station and starts getting ready. A lot of the guys were telling him not to worry about it. They can just check the trap in the morning for footprints and showed obvious signs of concern. But of course, he brushed it off and was handed a large ring of keys. The keys were to unlock the multiple ranch gates in the county, as he would be driving deep into the middle of nowhere and through multiple properties. He got into his service vehicle, made sure he had all the supplies he needed, and then took off down the old county road, and then he would later turn off to a gated ranch road. It took him over an hour of passing through multiple gates and driving unkempt dirt roads just to get to that spot. He left in the late afternoon, and by the time he arrived at the post, dusk was just upon him. He said that the spot was loaded with mesquite and creosote and all sorts of brush. You couldn't walk through the brush unless you had a bush hog tractor clear the place out. There was, however, a small, worn path leading from the river that you could get through just barely. This is where the sand trap was placed, since it served as a choke point for any foot traffic. Of course, the trap is devoid of any footprints, so he settles down and waits for nightfall. The night was pretty uneventful. The moon was out and lit up the area in a dim, ethereal light. The air was still, and despite being out in the middle of nowhere in Texas, there weren't many of the usual night sounds he was accustomed to. He says he would have fallen asleep, but the lack of sound kept him on edge and made him unnecessarily anxious. At around 3 or 4 a.m., he was getting the feeling that maybe the spot was not so bad after all, and his anxiety was from him just hearing rumors. Then he heard the faint sound of footsteps. He put out his cigarette and tightened his grip on his .357 Magnum sidearm. The sound of brush being pushed away and footsteps got closer. The moon was lower now, and it was very dark, but he could see the silhouettes of 3 men come into view. They emerged from the brush, but something was off about their appearance. He thought maybe it was the lack of light, but their silhouettes were pitch black. It was dark, but these forms looked like they were darker than night. Their eyes were glowing, similar to how a cat's would if you shined a light at their face in the dark. He called out to them, but they kept moving, ignoring his commands to freeze. They walk in single file, slowly ambling along the path. He points his vehicle spotlight at them and feels his blood run cold. The forms look like shadows cast on a wall in a puppet show. He said it looked like someone was walking in front of a spotlight, but the shadows that were cast were disembodied and did not belong to anything. He stood in awe and fear for probably 45 minutes. The forms were gone, and there was no longer any sound coming from the brush. He went down to check the sand trap and found that it was still smooth, and it was like nobody had ever crossed that area. He suddenly felt dreadful, and as though someone was watching him. The feeling would not go away, and he started to feel fearful. He got in his vehicle and left. He drove straight to Eagle Pass, and since my grandpa came in early, he heard everything from the now shaken Mr. L. My grandpa didn't have a fun time, as Mr. L did not bother to lock the numerous ranch gates behind him. I wish I could say this is the fun part of the story, where my grandpa goes over there to close it for him and see the spot for himself, but he had stuff to do, and delivered the keys back to the Del Rio station and let them take care of it. Mr. L never went back to that area, but he stopped making fun of his fellow colleagues' stories. Funnily enough, not much changed about him. He wasn't scared of anything, and was a mean guy all around. But whenever Mr. L retold the story at later times, my dad could tell that it was an event that really shook him. My grandpa continued to hear stories about that remote Del Rio post, but over time he heard less as he was given assignments that took him away from that town. He believes it was haunted, and people said it was an evil place, and although they never caught anybody in the area, in his 7 years as a border patrol agent, there surely was something crossing over. Sweet. This one is another one of my grandpa's border patrol stories. It's another one that didn't happen to my grandpa, but was told by his colleague as they were exchanging stories one morning at the station. His colleague, who we will call Angus, was another one of those true Texan, no bullshit types. He graduated from Texas A&M University, was a bona fide cowboy, and had worked as a ranch hand for years before coming onto the Texas Border Patrol. He would patrol ranches and other properties near the border on horseback and would monitor sand traps and look for anything or anyone suspicious. This one instance took place near Rio Grande City. He was on horseback in the middle of nowhere on a ranch in Starr County, Texas. The sun was hot, and he had not come across anything or anybody for hours. He was miles away from any service road, much less a county road, and he started to get thirsty. He took a quick break to drink some water and get his horse hydrated too. He wiped the sweat off his brow when maybe 500 feet away, he saw a figure moving across the plains at a decent pace. He took a sip out of his canteen and got his binoculars out. He could see it was an older man with a cowboy hat riding a horse at a slight trot. Angus closed his canteen and put his binoculars back around his neck. He radioed in the incident and mounted his horse and took off after the person, hoping to intercept him. He started off with his horse at a full gallop, kicking up dust behind him. The area was hilly, and he passed a bend and saw that the rider was now further away than he was before. Confused but determined, Angus drove his spurs into the side of his horse to goad it into going faster. They started to gain ground on the other rider. He disappeared around another bend, but Angus was close behind. When Angus came around the bend, he saw that the rider was even further away. Angus started to get pissed off. Obviously, the guy was fucking with him, and he was ready to apprehend him. He gets his horse to go even faster. His hat was barely hanging on, and everything was shaking and starting to come loose from their holsters and bags. He gained on the figure yet again, but after another bend, the figure came even further away. He had never made his horse go this fast. Its grunts were harsh and labored. After each bend, the figure got further and further away, until it finally disappeared. For fear of his horse's safety, he decided to call off the pursuit and radio in that the suspect had got away. He dismounted and gave his horse some water. They had probably traveled about 5 to 10 miles from where they originally spotted the lone horseback rider. He decided to double back. He started to notice that the only tracks were his own. No other tracks but the ones from his horse were found the whole way back. He told everyone on the McAllen horseback unit all about it and asked them if they ever experienced anything like it. But not one of them believed him. Said it was just a mirage, or he had heatstruck. Angus assured them that he knew the signs of heatstruck and his limits. He had been a ranch hand for years after all. He would not have continued if he knew he was not well enough to do so. He let it go for a little while, but told my grandpa eventually when he did some work in Eagle Pass. He never seemed scared about it, but perplexed. He continued working in the area of Stark County, but he never experienced anything like that ever again.